Hello, everyone. My name is Brian. I am a developer from Florida, and today we're going to go over the Learn SQL project, REBU. Our key concepts for today are join, union, count, and average. These are all SQL commands that you can use to get results from queries and make your job a little bit easier. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Here we are in our project. As you can read here from the overview, we are going to be using multiple tables, and we're going to practice join and combining rows from different tables. By this point, you should have been somewhat familiar to these from previous exercises, and if you have not, it's okay. We can just carry on. Now it's telling us that we have to suppose that there is data at REBU, and we have three tables, one called trips with trip information, one called riders with users data, and one called cars, which have anonymous cars. So let's go ahead and move to step 1, where it is asking us to write the following queries. Select all from trips, riders, and cars. And it is asking us what are the column names. And we're going to see those right now. So I ran that query, and we can see here that trips has an ID, date, pickup, drop off, rider ID, car ID, type, and cost. Riders has ID, first, last name, username, ratings, total trips, and referred. And cars has ID, the model, the OS, status, and trips completed. You can also see that here in the database schema, trips, and you can see all the columns and the data type for each of the tables. So let's mark step 1 as completed and move on to step number 2. Now, step number 2, there is no coding required. It's just asking us what the primary key of each table is. And each of them is ID. And you just have to understand that it's an ID of that particular row for that table. So this ID in the trips table is not the same as the ID in the riders table or the cars table. Now let's move on to step 3. Try out a simple join between riders and cars. So let's go ahead and try something. So select, I'm going to pick from the riders table first and last. So a cross join, you just name the table and then the column. So first, then riders last. And then from cars, I am going to select model. So cars.model. From riders and cars. So here we have the result, Sonny Lee, and then the models of the cars, etc. So now let's move over to step number 4. Now, before I do that, I am actually going to comment out the previous queries. And the reason for that is just I don't want to have this area cluttered and have to scroll down and figure out what the results are every time. So I'm just going to be commenting them out as we move on. So for step number 4, we have to suppose that we want to create a trip log with the trips and its users. So we're going to find the columns to join between trips and riders and combine the two tables using a left join. Let trips be the left table. Okay, so we are going to select all from trips, and we are going to left join with riders on trips dot rider ID equals riders dot ID. So if we look at the schema, or actually the results when we selected all of the database, we see here that trips has a column called rider ID and car ID, and those corresponds to the primary key from the other tables. So rider ID is this ID here from the riders table, and car ID is the ID from the cars table. So let's go ahead and run that query. And here we see that now we have everything from the trips table, and in addition to that, we have everything from the riders table, where the rider ID equals the trip ID. So let's go ahead and move on to step number 5. And once again, I am going to comment this out. Now, suppose we want to create a link between trips and cars using those trips, and is saying to find the columns to join on and combine the trips and cars using an inner join. This is going to be a very similar query. So we are going to select all from trips, and we are going to join with cars on trips dot car ID equals cars dot ID. And now we see that we actually have the tables joined with the cars table as opposed to the riders table. We see here trips completed, the model of the car, etc. So I'm going to mark step 5 as completed and move on to step number 6. Once again, commenting everything out. So the new riders data are in. There are 3 new users this month, and we're going to stack the riders table on top of the new table named riders 2. So let's go ahead and select all from riders, and we are going to use union to combine with all from riders 2. And here we see that we have 7 users as opposed to the original 3 or 4 users that we had on just the riders table. If you want to confirm, you can run the query with just riders, and you'll be able to tell the difference. So moving on to step number 7, we are going to create some bonus questions and queries, and that will be number 7, which is what is the average cost for a trip? We're going to use the cost function on SQL. So we're going to select the average of the column cost from trips. And we see here that we get 31.915. We can use the round function to round down to 2 digits, and we get 31.92. Now we're going to move on to step number 8, which is saying that REBU is looking to do an email campaign for all the irregular users. So we need to find all writers who have used REBU less than 500 times. So we're going to select all from writers where they have used less than 500 writes, and I'm going to look at the writers table, and I see here there's a column called total trips. So total trips is less than 500. And here we see 2 users, Laura and Hakov. So let's comment that out. And move on to step number 9. So now we're going to calculate the number of cars that are active. So for that, we're going to use count. So we're going to select the count from cars, where if we see here in the cars table where status, the column that we're looking for, where status equals active. We're going to save, and we see here that we get a count of 3. Now, once again, I am going to comment this out. And move on to step number 10, which is the final one. So it's safety recall time for cars that have been on the road for a while. So we're going to write a query that finds the 2 cars that have the highest amount of trips completed. So I am going to select all from cars, and I am going to order by. Looking at the table, trips completed is the name of the column, so trips completed. Now this query is not done yet, but I see here that I have 4. I'm doing this to show you guys how this works. I have 4 cars, one with 22, 30, 82, and 165, 64. And the default order for this would be ascending order, so from lowest to highest. But since we want the 2 with the highest, we have to revert that number. So we have to make it descending. And since we only want 2, we're going to limit the query to 2 rows. So for that, we're just going to add descending, and then we're going to limit to 2. We're going to save, and now we get the 2 cars with the most, which are the one with 164 and 82. I hope you guys enjoyed this walkthrough for the multiple tables with REBU project. As you can tell, SQL is very important and very useful for developers for you to be able to successfully do your job and be able to manipulate data a lot easier and get to work with the data that you need and not have to go through tons of information to get what you want. With SQL, you're able to narrow the amount of data that you have, and you're able to just query and get the results for the amount or the specific data that you need in order to do whatever you have to do with that data. So thank you very much. Once again, my name was Brian from Code Academy. Happy coding.